Let's get straight to my next guest, Brendan O'Neill, chief political writer at Spiked Online. A very, very good morning to you.
Hi, Julia.
Thanks
how you
for
doing?
Very well indeed. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to talk to you about various different policing issues that seem to be very much at the front on the front pages. I mean, not just what horrific events in Liverpool, and we may well get a news of any charges brought against the suspect there after 65 people injured in Liverpool. But we've got two interesting stories about, well, three really, but two involving senior police figures who are basically warning the government that look, they are putting the country in danger and people in danger by their what their plans are. One is a whole load of senior police chiefs basically warning that, you know, your crime pledges, Prime Minister, are in peril if you're going to, you know, basically cut our budgets and have a load of people released onto the streets. We've got MI5, Met Police Chief, and the National Crime Agency bosses saying early release of prisoners is basically putting us at risk. What is the solution to this, Brendan?
You know, a lot of this is just so commonsensical. I mean, your listeners will be listening to what these top cops are saying and just nodding along.
Yeah.
Of course, if you release dangerous prisoners early, that's going to be a problem. If you don't investigate crimes sufficiently or have enough bobbies on the beat, there's going to be more crime. I mean, all of this it's not rocket science, is it? But Keir Starmer and his government doesn't seem particularly interested in keeping the public safe. I mean, there are certain issues they would rather we didn't even talk about. They would rather we didn't talk about the problem of knife crime. They would rather we didn't talk about Islamic terrorism or...
Well, that would make you racist, Brendan.
Yeah, exactly. So they will say you're Islamophobic, you're racist, you're stirring up unnecessary strife. They've got all these excuses to put off serious discussions about the crime problems in this country. And that just makes people angry. And when they see dangerous prisoners, you know, of course, people are sympathetic to letting well-behaved prisoners who are not a threat to the public out of jail early. If they are rehabilitated, if they've become
Lucy
good people.
Connolly, for instance.
Exactly. Lucy Connolly is a perfect example. And of course, she's not being allowed out. But, you know, when it comes to people who are dangerous or who have been involved in armed crime or violence against the person, it makes sense to make them do their whole sentence.
Or I would say repeat offenders, which most of them are.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, the question is whether this government is serious about securing our streets. And that is a great concern that people have. And I know there is this tendency to look down on ordinary people as law and order obsessives. There is nothing wrong with wanting the streets to be safe. That's what people want.
It's such a basic part. I mean, look, number one job of a government, protect the borders. Not doing very well at that. Number two is simply to keep law and order on the streets, and people do not feel that that's happening either. Do you think that decriminalising cannabis will improve things? Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, said a commission, an independent commissioner, the former Labour Justice Secretary, Lord Faulkner, doing a report into this, he's concluded that basically the police are using the smell of cannabis as the excuse for stopping and searching young black people in London. That's creating, you know, difficulties between the police and ethnic minorities. So the solution, bizarrely, is if you decriminalise it for possession, that won't happen, the police won't have to deal with it, and then everything will be fine and dandy. Is that the answer?
You know, the idea that it's somehow wrong to tell someone that they stink of cannabis, lots of people do these days. It's not just black kids, all sorts of kids, and not even kids, older people too as well. I'm slightly torn on this issue because I'm a bit of an old-fashioned liberal and I think people should be able to do what they want. But the marijuana problem in cities like London is out of control. This city stinks. I smell marijuana virtually every time I go out in public. I see people smoking it on the way to work. I mean, that is just ridiculously antisocial. It would be like me swigging from a bottle of vodka on my way to the office. This is not how...
But it's become socially acceptable. And again, drug driving is a very big issue now. A lot of people just think that's completely the norm. But this is the thing. But you say you're an old liberal. You're kind of border on libertarian. You're like, if it's not hurting me, why did it bother me if you're doing it? But the reality is, it does hurt people, and particularly, you know, young kids, lives ahead of them. It does. I mean, there's loads of evidence about how it affects their brains, how it affects motivation, and also the involvement in criminality. Because unless you legalised it completely, the people selling it to you are still criminals. You're still drawn into links to a criminal world, which is not a good thing.
In some ways, I think weed is the worst drug because it is such an atomizing drug. It does weird things to kids' brains. It does change the brain. It changes their behavior. It changes the way they see the world. It drives them ever more into themselves, which I think is one reason why they think it's fine and dandy to walk down the street smoking a joint, because they're only thinking about themselves. They're thinking about getting high. It makes people into idiots. You know, there's a reason it's called dope. It turns people dopey.
This is the thing. So as I was saying earlier, one of my main reasons, I had a very good friend of mine used to, very successful now, and she used to smoke dope, and she said, "You're always so judgy about it." I said, "No, you're just so boring when you smoke dope. You're just boring." But I also know a lot of people from my age group who you know, either cannabis was the gateway drug to other drugs, or they just carried on the cannabis, and it's just addled their brains.
You know, there's a reason why politicians like Sadiq Khan are in favor of partially legalizing cannabis, but they're always very anti-alcohol. They think booze is the big curse. Now, booze can be a problem for some people, but the reason they dislike alcohol is because it's the social lubricant. It's what we do when we go out and mix with other people and have conversations and socialize in the pub. You know, it's part of society. That makes them suspicious. That makes them wary. They like cannabis because it's quite an individuated thing. It's like you at home, maybe with a handful of friends, and then you eat loads of Whatsits because you get the munchies. They like that vision for Britain rather than the vision of people getting out there getting drunk.
Just stay in your homes, don't do anything at all. That's a fascinating analysis. Let me also talk to you about someone who's definitely been in his home rather more, not in Downing Street, since he got the sack from Boris Johnson's government, and that's Dominic Cummings. He was the man behind Vote Leave. I mean, the man is utterly brilliant. There's no Machiavellian as well, and his big plan was to go into government with Boris Johnson. He called him the trolley, didn't he, the supermarket trolley, that he was going to basically control him behind the scenes, puppet on a string, but also he was going to get his time in office to basically, you know, tear up the civil service, tear up how Britain was run, and start again. I loved it. I'm desperate for him to do it. As it was, I think his ego got a little bit too big for him, and he didn't get much of that done. And he was the one, pretty much the architect of us going into lockdown. So got quite a few issues there. He's done an interview with Sky News where he has said that basically he thinks that Nigel Farage could well be the next Prime Minister. He sees definitely able to be the next Prime Minister, but he says that he can only do it if he listens to him about how to go from being one man and an iPhone to being, well, on the cusp of walking into that door at number 10 Downing Street. Do you think it's possible? Do you think it's likely?
I think it's possible. I think it's getting more and more likely. I also think it's desirable. You know, I think Farage is a good politician. I think he's pretty much a good bloke. I don't agree with him on everything, but you know, who do we agree with someone on everything on? I think he would make a great change for this country. People are crying out for something different to the two-party system where we just switch between one cardboard cutout and another. People are sick and tired of that. And I think Dominic Cummings is right. I think you're right to say that he's someone worth listening to as well, because he does have that rebellious spirit. Cummings wanted to rip up the blob and really empty out Whitehall and force it to comply with the wishes of the public, if you can imagine something so radical.
Crazy stuff.
And, you know, he succeeded in winding them up. He didn't succeed in his entire mission, of course. But one thing I would say to someone like Dominic Cummings is he was sometimes a bit too much into nerds and experts and a new kind of expertise that was more kind of game theory and nerdish.
But still technocratic, still better. We know better than you.
Yeah, it was like swapping one technocracy for another at certain points. And I think what Farage has going for him is that he connects with ordinary people. He's the politician that most people would want to have a pint with, because he understands their issues. He can talk to them as if they're normal, if believe that or not. So I would say take advice from Cummings when it comes to standing up to the blob, but be wary of those new kinds of radical expertise. Yeah,
and indeed also, again, that ego, and that can often be an issue. Nigel Farage has been criticised many times on the ego front, hasn't he? It's interesting that he did a big set-piece speech yesterday, announced various policies, Nigel Farage, about what he wanted to do in cutting various, or boosting various different benefits. I agree with him on some, like you, disagree with him on others. It's fascinating that the hit back from Labour is, oh, he's just a posh public school boy and he wants to privatise the NHS. They're obsessed with that, aren't they?
They are obsessed and they cannot handle the fact that Keir Starmer is eating into Labour territory, not just physical, geographical Labour territory, but political territory. It used to be the Labour Party that cared about working class people a long time ago. It used to be the Labour Party that wanted people to have jobs, to have full employment, and to provide welfare for those who were down on their luck and unemployed, not for everyone who just felt a bit lazy one Monday morning. So he's eating into that old territory. Eating into old Labour territory. And I think that's going to put the wind up them to an extraordinary degree, because that appeals to a lot of ordinary people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Labour, these people, they seem to forget that their only really successful leader they've had in the last 50 years, getting re-elected, or elected 3 times, re-elected twice, was Tony Blair, who went to Fetters Public School. I think I don't know why they get it. Talking of the NHS, I just want to ask you about junior doctors, because we've got, well, they're now called resident doctors, quite right, because they're not junior. These are highly, highly qualified individuals who've been working in hospitals often for 10 years at a time after their qualifications. But these are they're looking now at a 30% pay rise, and are threatening to go on strike. Now, that may well be an opening position, but bearing in mind a couple of years ago they did get that, well, a year ago, they got that 22% pay rise. It was backdated over 2 years. They ended up with 4% last year. They are still, like a lot of public servants and a lot of people in the private sector, still actually, since 2010, real terms worse off than they were in 2010. However, looking at 30%, and of course we've got all the other public sector unions saying, I'd like my pay rise as well, please. This is going to create a lot of headaches for not just number 10 Downing Street, but number 11, Rachel Reeves. She's got a spending review in 2 weeks' time. She's got to have a budget in the autumn. And basically, there ain't enough money to pay for these things. What should she do?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because I think resident doctors should be paid well, and they should get a wage that reflects the contribution they make to society, which is an important contribution. We're all a bit angry with the NHS for what happened 5 years ago, and various things that the NHS does in relation to COVID and other issues, which are not always particularly helpful. But it's an important institution, and the people who work for it play an important role, so they deserve a good wage. But the thing is, I think one of the problems with this government is that it gets its economic priorities all wrong. Yeah. So we know, and you've talked about this as well, Julia, that we are going to be spending a lot of money housing illegal immigrants, not only in hotels, but also in actual homes, in houses, and other spending like that really gets people's backs up, because they just think, why are we giving money to this thing and not giving it to the other thing? So one problem is skewed priorities in terms of the economy and politics, which makes things like this more difficult to resolve.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's interesting that Reform said they're going to get rid of the asylum hotels. Well, where are you going to put these people? Because, you're not going to be able to deport those, hundreds of thousands of people, as they probably will be by the time if they get elected. Brendan O'Neill, great to talk to you. Covered a lot of ground there. Really appreciate that. Chief political writer at Spiked Online.